Jubilee's popular Surrounded series promised us 1 Christian versus 20 atheists. Instead, we got Jordan Peterson. Peterson has undoubtedly opened a lot of people, especially young men, to questions about God, heaven, and what it means to live a good life. He has an enormous audience and once seemed to answer a deep need in our culture for asking big questions and having deep conversations. But something was off on the Jubilee show. Christians who usually see him as an ally, or at least a gateway drug to the church, were disappointed, if not outright disgusted, at the way he engaged or refused to engage with the atheists. Peterson, after all, did sign up to represent Christians to an audience of millions, even if he later forced Jubilee to change the title of the show to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. So what went wrong? Well, in the end, the debate wasn't about God or Christ. It was all about him. I'm going to walk you through the viral moments from the debate that are the key to understanding what happened and how a well-formed Christian could have handled things if Jubilee had let them.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
This is really promising right from the get-go. It's a neutral opening claim in a way. It leaves the discussion open. The most common atheist delusion is that God is just the superpower entity in the universe of entities, meaning, like a Greek god, God is just the biggest, strongest, most powerful guy among all the guys in the universe, like Thor or, even Iron Man. Now, a Christian would see this claim as an opportunity to discuss the Christian distinction. In Christianity, we distinguish between God and the universe. God is God, and the world is everything that is not God, including ourselves. God is the creator of everything, but that is not God. God does not exist in the world he has created, but outside of it, outside of space and time. Indeed, God himself created space and time. And then from there, we might go on to address the other most common atheist challenge: how can a good God who is interested in us allow evil and suffering? So I was excited. This is a good claim to start with. So let's see where this goes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind.
I think that immediately we had a very specific claim. The guy sits down, he's like, I was raised Catholic. I know all this stuff about the Catholic Church. This comes up a lot in conversations just that you and I might have with people who no longer practice the Catholic faith or have left the church. And Peterson immediately just says, your aim's off. The better response would have been, okay, what was it that you rejected in your mind? Like, to get a sense of what Cade thinks he's actually rejecting, since he seems to be a total expert on the Christian God, and then let him talk for a little bit. But instead it goes from, well, your aim was off. It immediately starts psychologizing the whole process of Cade rejecting God in a way that I don't think the claim itself was asking him to do.
My experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
He kind of starts to drill down into it right there where he says, okay, they're off on what they believe God to be, or they've been hurt by someone in religion. And this is often the case with young men, especially who have left the church, who have gone through seminary. There was some kind of hurt going on there. Both of those things are very true. Hope that we can drill into a little more of the actual argument.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim.
There we go.
How do you define the God that you're rejecting?
Thank you.
Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in.
Aha! Cade, thank you. So immediately Cade sits down and he's like, wait a minute, I signed up to debate Christians. I have a very clear understanding. I mean, everything he listed there is true about what Christians believe in God. He's omnipresent, he's omniscient, et cetera, all powerful. And then he's like, but you don't actually believe that. You have this like meta thing substrate. And so I think Cade's immediately starting to put the uneasiness that you see on the other participants' faces right now, thinking, wait a minute, did we sign up for a Christian or for Jordan Peterson? So I'm going to actually skip ahead here. You can go back, watch the whole thing. Millions of people have already, so join the club. But I'm going to skip ahead to Greg because, and this is to the same claim. So Greg's there for the same claim that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. I like Greg. Greg was also on the Michael Knowles episode of Surrounded, where it was Michael Knowles versus 25 trans activists. And that was actually fascinating because I got the sense from Greg, and Michael Knowles did too, that in this case, Greg was genuinely interested in engaging the questions, not on an emotional, personal level, although that comes into it, but on a genuinely wanting to understand where the other person is coming from.
Scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you? Yes? No? Or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that, I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
This is where Jordan Peterson has a lot of strengths, and I think it's why he's so popular and he draws so much attention. Because he is a trained scientist, he brings the empirical and the scientific realms, but he also has a deep respect for the areas of art and myth and legend and culture, and understands that there is more to the underlying unity of things that can give purpose to life. And in this way, I think Catholics really feel that Jordan Peterson, and Bishop Barron has expressed this, Jordan Peterson kind of gets the Catholic ethos, where faith and reason are the two wings on which our faith rises, on which religion rises, and we rise to God. And that Peterson has this sort of empathy for the Catholic distinction. But let's watch a little bit longer because it starts to tease out and fall apart a little bit when Greg gets confused.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
All right, so he is throwing a little bit of spaghetti at the wall, but I think it's not random for Jordan. He is not going in a metaphysical direction with these arguments about the existence of God. So I might have been like, oh, let's go Aquinas, let's go St. Anselm route, metaphysical, right? And arguments, but he wants to go in a moral direction, which is also a legit path to at least showing that there are reasons for credibility for the existence of God. Traditionally, just for those of you who want to know, the moral argument for God, but without the big fancy words that you get from Jordan, is if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. That's sort of the simple, general, generic moral argument for the existence of God. So what Jordan's going to try and do here is get Greg to say, yeah, I believe in some objective moral truths. I believe that there's a unifying objective moral order.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the
It is.
difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could
I
imagine
infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason.
This is a very typical enlightenment-based reason is going to get us out of all of the messes that we are in as human beings, and this sort of progressivist ethos that humankind is evolving progressively to be better and better against what sort of metric or first principle. That's what Jordan is challenging Greg to try and identify.
For example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road, I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
Is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah, like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay?
Now we get a little bit strange. Jordan's going to go back to his sort of like meta theme, meta myth going on here. He says, Elijah defined God as the voice of conscience within. This is referring to the passage in Kings with the still small voice, right? God is not in the storm, God was not in the thunder, but he was in the still small voice that the prophet hears after the storm has passed. So what is this mysterious voice within us that whispers when we've done right or when we've done wrong? We see the argument here from Jordan. It's the voice of conscience. It's that deep instinct of the heart that helps us tell good from evil. Now, John Henry Newman, St. John Henry Newman, who is going to come up multiple times from Peterson during the debate, called it, quote, the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. The vicar of Christ that we think of most often as Catholics, of course, is the Pope, Leo XIV right now, the successor of St. Peter and the guardian of the doctrine and morals of the faith. But the conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the human soul. And although Newman affirmed the Pope as Christ's vicar on earth, he also believed that conscience was even more fundamental, more primal, and more inward. And Peterson likes that, right? He likes going to the vicar of Christ being the conscience, but he identifies it with God directly. This we call God, kind of conclusion. So I'm going to keep going a little bit here with Greg. Peterson gives us his definition of God.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm
where,
not defining it. Elijah
okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined
it.
it that way.
there goes
I'm sure
Newman.
you know many people who've defined it that way. And it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right.
This confirms what Peterson likes about Christianity. He likes the moral teachings, and he's positioning himself squarely in the camp of Jesus was a wise teacher or an archetype of the hero figure, right? The man who raised himself vertically. This is all like very Jungian speak. Like he raises himself, he stands like a man, and he is a good example to us all, an exemplar of the good moral life. Later on, he's going to qualify it with Greg and say God is also the unified source of morality. And again, that's a perfectly legitimate way to get at motives of credibility for believing in God and saying it's not unreasonable to believe in God. It's not what an atheist would maybe receive as an absolute proof in the way that they would receive a Euclidean geometric proof, like I give you 3 premises and now you have to admit that there's a God. But what you do as a Christian is you offer motives of credibility, meaning reasons why it's not unreasonable to believe that God exists, or reasons why it's more reasonable to believe in God than to not believe in God. And that's what he just doesn't bring home here with Greg. He goes through the Elijah thing. He's saying, well, Jonah said it too. Newman said it too. And it doesn't bring it home.
So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, again, it goes back to my example of the Mona
I'm
Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament,
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure, so whoever, so some...
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
Okay, and this is where we just start to lose the thread with Jordan. He's treating Greg as a 5-year-old child. And however annoyed you might be getting with Greg, that doesn't excuse the fact that you are there, you signed up to represent a worldview, and you just start talking down to people. So I'm going to move on now. We've established that Jordan is going to offer mostly this argument from conscience, that God is conscience. God is the unifying principle of morality. So I'm going to have to abandon my hopes of having a good metaphysical argument for motives of credibility. So let's just see what we can do with morality and purpose.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Let's see how this goes. I'm going to skip over to Brian, who I really enjoyed listening to.
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
Voluntary upward self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of God can be established on earth. No, that is not the purpose of life. That is the Pelagian purpose of life. Those of you familiar with the Pelagian controversy, which said that without grace, man has the capacity of his own voluntary being to basically replicate the divinity and the virtues of Jesus Christ, and thereby effect the kingdom of God on earth. It's a very, what we call imminent eschatology. So the kingdom of God can be established here on earth of our own efforts. No, but Peterson likes that part of Christianity because it doesn't require you to actually grapple with the facticity of Jesus Christ and the question, did he die and rise again from the dead? Is he God? Don't be fooled. This is the purpose of life according to Jordan Peterson, not according to Christianity. I exist to show forth a higher purpose and make the world better, rather than the Baltimore Catechism, which tells us God made me to show forth his goodness and make me happy with him forever. Big difference.
I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you come to that conclusion?
And what I ought to do, ultimately it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking.
I'm so excited. This is getting really promising. Let's see where it goes.
When you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my definition of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself.
That's right. Nothing in the universe exists in and of itself, but God is outside the universe. So Jordan, he's passing you a softball here.
It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a
and that is
hierarchical
what
structure?
the quantum.
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
are some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What is
pause there.
Oh, this is where, so Brian here just got voted off by everyone else around him because they got tired of listening. It wasn't entertaining anymore or something, or enough of them didn't like the points that he was making. And this is what drives me crazy about Surrounded sometimes, because you start to get to these really long discussions and then they get voted off and they have to end the argument right there. Those are the rules. And you can see Jordan's frustrated as well. Now, it seems Brian was touching on this Aquinas-Aristotle definition of God as the unmoved mover. And then he claims there is nothing that exists in and of itself in the universe. And Jordan didn't point out any of the 5 proofs from Aquinas, wish he had, but he was moving Brian, I think, towards something like Aquinas's 4th proof. And this 4th way, I'll just read it to you. The 4th way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. There's a hierarchy, which is what Jordan was talking about. Among beings, there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like. But more and less are predicated of different things as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum, as a thing that is said to be hotter according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest. So there, okay, and I'm sounding like Jordan Peterson, guys, but I'm really just reading Aquinas. Basically, what the argument says is, as you see in nature in terms of things that are noble. There are things that are less noble, slightly more noble, very noble, and they all are called noble in comparison to one thing that is the noblest. And where you go from there with Aquinas is there must be something outside of the hierarchy against which everything in the hierarchy is being judged. But the reason why I don't think Jordan ever would have gotten there, even if Surrounded had given him all the time in the world, is that to make that leap to God is outside of the hierarchy is to get, in a way, to the Christian distinction. It's to get outside of the realm of the universe and of created things. And I don't think that Jordan Peterson's sort of mega myth view of the world has room for that yet until he makes the leap to, and Jesus Christ is God and came here and returned to the Father. But Surrounded entered it there, so we'll never know. I'm speculating. So let's go to Parker. Here comes Parker. Oh boy, love Parker.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience?
Cardinal Newman did not define God as conscience. Conscience is, again, this is what Peterson likes about Cardinal Newman because he thinks he can interpret him to say God is conscience. But he didn't say that. Conscience is not God. Conscience is an echo. It is a created capacity in human persons that is an echo of God's own voice. And it's a powerful tool that helps us understand moral truth and what God expects of us. Cardinal Newman saw the conscience as a way to discover lasting and objective truths about right and wrong. And again, I think Peterson agrees with that we have a way inside ourselves that is beyond reason, beyond logic, or other than reason and logic, that gives us access to objective truth in terms of morality. I think he agrees with Newman on that, but to go so far as to say that it's God isn't true. Newman also recognized that conscience does not automatically lead someone to God. It can only point toward God, but people still have to choose to follow that direction. We have that freedom. Newman did not think of conscience as just a personal feeling or an inner voice, which I think is how Parker is about to interpret that, but as something deeper with a connection to a higher objective reality that is beyond all of creation, beyond the universe. When properly understood, conscience reveals a personal God, someone who gives laws through reason and revelation and holds us accountable accountable. So for Newman, conscience isn't just the foundation of morality. It's not the unifying principle. It's not God. It's a starting point of true religion. For Newman and for Christians, conscience cannot function as a connection to God unless it is tethered to the truth of revelation, the question of who Jesus Christ is and what he did during his time on earth. And here's the key, and here's why this moment is so important. Because Jordan won't answer that question of who Jesus Christ is, he turns conscience into God, which ends up just turning my own inner instincts and sort of my connection with all the myths that have ever been of all the legends and some empiricism and science mixed in into God, which is in error. And it just kind of devolves from here.
He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that, Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by
Because
believe?
Newman did.
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say
circular?
you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
Okay,
I
we're
said
just floundering
you think
here.
it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
This is all very Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Gulag Archipelago. Like, I'm very inspired. It's very dramatic, but that's not what Parker was asking.
So you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life?
be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're
Oh my goodness. So I think at this point, Jordan like made the line that you'd be an unstoppable force. And then he just kind of like got sucked into that and couldn't hear what Parker was asking. I mean, Jordan became famous back in 2016, largely because of his public opposition to the Canadian law that added gender identity and gender expression to the list of prohibited grounds for discrimination. And he argued that the bill would compel speech by forcing people to lie and use preferred gender pronouns. I agree. I don't know why I use scare quotes. I completely agree that that's lying. Something that he saw as a threat to free speech. And ultimately, he did give up his clinical practice. He gave up a very lucrative career at the University of Toronto because he wouldn't kowtow to the law. Granted, it was a very brave thing to do. And it gave him a platform, and I think he might be getting a little too comfortable living off the fumes of that platform right now. The man who won't lie, and Parker just smells blood in the water, and so he's about to bring up the oldest example in the book.
and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have
asking?
done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that
would
situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you eat
don't
today?
play games.
I'm not playing games. I'm just
Yes,
asking if
you
you ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on that line of questioning is where he lost me. This is, first of a couple of points. This is just shameful. Sure, maybe Parker is playing games here, but Surrounded is a game. And you surely knew that this example would come up when you insisted on only approaching God's existence through the arguments of morality and conscience. You surely knew this, because the implication of this example, and the reason why it comes up all the time, is that even Christians will compromise their quote-unquote moral absolutes given the right circumstances. And of course, they bring up the Jews and the Nazis. And the implication is, therefore, there's no objective morality. There's always a circumstance. And so the moral argument for the existence of God fails. But when it comes to the way that Jordan responded, this was so frustrating, because Jordan, the Christian tradition has a robust exploration of this question. And Peterson is certainly well-read enough to know this, especially since John Henry Newman, in the Apologia Pro Vita Sua, he discusses in much detail the positions of, among others, St. Alphonsus Liguori, Clement of Alexandria, both of whom held that there were special or extraordinary circumstances that would justify telling a lie. In Latin, it's called the justa causa. And I know Jordan has read the Apologia Pro Vita Sua. He must have come across this. The argument that Newman uses to explain the justa causa comes from Aquinas himself. St. Thomas, to the effect, he says that if from one cause two immediate effects follow, so we've got the principle of double effect, right? We have one thing that we do, and we know two things are going to happen. If the good effect, saving the Jew, of that cause is equal in value to the bad effect, deceiving the Nazi, then nothing hinders that the good may be intended and the evil permitted. And now my Dominican friends are going to pull their hair out. Father Gregory Pine, do not watch this video, or actually just call me and we can have a debate. I loved your debate with Janet Smith. But we're gonna leave it at that. There is a robust Christian tradition of this very question. And for Jordan Peterson to get there in the hot seat, to be the Christian with the atheists, and to just say, I'm not going to answer a hypothetical, you're playing games with me. Well, you signed up for the game, bud. All right, now we're going to move on. So in the third claim, Jordan says,
everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
I was like, okay, let's reset the clock here. This could be really good because, yeah, if you define worship as we all have a central value around which we sacrifice multiple things for our lives, yes, this could be a really good thing to discuss. So in the process of talking about worship, here comes Zena, who's actually really, really good. I really appreciated her questions. She had obviously studied Peterson's thought.
One of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that. And that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like, you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
Again, this is a real strength of Peterson. He's able to diagnose and articulate the nihilism and the purposelessness and the just darkness of the postmodern political reality. And he gets a lot of these ideas from Solzhenitsyn. He's talking about Jung himself. Freud understood some of it, but then he offers as an antidote this sort of like, well, if we all just agreed to self-sacrifice instead of to take power as our primary goal of politics and living together in ethics, then it would change things. And you're like, right, but humans can't do that. Again, he has this Pelagian feeling that if we just all agreed hard enough, we could pull ourselves out of this. It reminds me a lot of, in her book, The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt, who, brilliant philosopher, love her stuff. Her talk about technology is so incredible and so prophetic. But in the end, in terms of her prognosis or her prescription for what ails modern man, she says, we all just need to turn to forgiveness. And I'm like, well, that's a Christian principle. And it's a Christian principle that she likes a lot. But the historical reality is human beings without divine grace are manifestly incapable of forgiving. We are manifestly incapable of building a society based on self-sacrifice. Can we do it? We can individually by natural law. Once in a while, we'll have these gestures of great virtue. We've seen this in the past in non-Christian societies, but they are the exception, not the rule. So to say that we can somehow have the rule of human society be self-sacrifice without answering the question, is God real? Is there grace? Is faulty.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can
Right.
definitely
And that's
say
very
it that way.
admirable.
That's exactly right. And
Right.
navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
The Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example.
Yeah.
And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
They're
So is that
addressing
person
the
Christian,
same-
though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because
Exactly.
they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern.
Of
Right? So,
Christianity.
so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things, and you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something
8,
like
12
that.
Christian.
Oh my gosh. So, again, like at this point, I'm just like, wait, we've devolved into 8/12 Christian. This brings me back to sitting around the seminar table, graduate school of philosophy. Emory University considers itself Ivy League of the South, whatever. I mean, I'm not like saying I was great or anything, but I made it. I was in the PhD program, and you're sitting around this table and everyone just keeps, you get to this point where you're like, well, maybe they are 8/12 Christian. And I'm sitting there thinking, but what's the truth? And the problem is that to answer, Jordan is so close. He understands that science is important. He understands that to live a moral life and self-sacrifice and forgiveness are important. But to make that final leap to who is Jesus Christ, somehow he's going to silo that off. So you can have most of it. You can have 80% of what's good about Christianity, and you can maybe do away with that 20%. The problem is that what we believe and how we live are not separate. They are not in their own separate silos. They don't just like fill up. It's not like a Pyrex measuring glass where you have the 2 cups, and the whole thing is imbued with Christianity. And what all those medieval philosophers and theologians were looking at and questioning, okay, could Plato be in heaven? Could Moses be in heaven? Because he had the practice, but not Jesus Christ. Plato had the structure of the unmoved mover, but not the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Could they be in heaven? And they end up saying yes, but if they are there, if they are before the throne of God, it is only through the sacrifice, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in the end. And yeah, for Jordan to just be like, well, they had this notion of they were 80% Christian. It's just not true.
But to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
And she gets it. That's the question. I really loved that girl. She was awesome. And Jordan liked her too. He was very complimentary to the end. So we're going to skip ahead to Danny. Danny went viral. If you've watched any clips from this before you watched this one, this analysis, you probably saw Danny because, oh my gosh.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You say atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Ooh.
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
Parker.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to. Do
prioritize,
do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to my definition.
you understand.
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend the
So you
Catholic.
can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate?
Jordan, you need to be the grown-up in this conversation.
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Oh, and we're going to end it with Danny. I mean, look, was Danny a smartass? Yeah, he was. But again, you signed up for the game and you have to be the big boy in the seat. And in fact, after Danny's appearance on this and a few hours of people being like, wait, why is this called One Christian versus 20 Atheists? They changed the title to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. But again, I think part of the frustration here is that Jordan Peterson knew that he was coming to represent Christians. That was the original title. All of these kids were clearly, and a couple of grown-ups, were clearly prepped to debate a Christian. All of their conceptions of God that they brought were very legitimate Christian conceptions of God, omnipotent, omniscient, etc. And they didn't sit down to what they thought they were going to sit down to. Peterson wants to play it safe for himself when it comes to Jesus Christ and God, and he's hiding behind esoteric sounding words and interpretations of Scripture. But the price he pays for not committing doctrinally to Christian belief, even if he likes certain elements of Christian morality and the biblical stories, is that, like the Jubilee video title, he just turns it into Jordan Peterson versus the world. It's no longer representing something outside of himself. It's just himself. So I actually want to end with this clip from an interview that he did with Jonathan Pageau in 2021. And at this moment, I saw Jordan Peterson confront the crux of the problem. And this, along with his wife's recent conversion to the Catholic Church, I think gave a lot of Christians that hope for him that he was about to make that decision. Watch this.
So you can think about Christ from a psychological perspective, and the critic, my critic, this particular critic that I've been reading, said, well, that doesn't differentiate Christ much from a whole sequence of dying and resurrecting mythological gods. And of course, people have made that claim in comparative religion. Joseph Campbell did that, and Jung to a lesser degree, I would say, but Campbell did that. But the difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out as well, the difference between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a representation of, there's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense because this, well, it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. You know, we have a narrative sense of the world For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
And that's really beautiful, because that's true. So we have the sense of, we have science and empiricism and reason. We have the narrative and the moral and the poetic order, which is equally real. And in the Catholic tradition, they touch. Why? Why is that? How can they touch? How can they both be objectively real? They can only be objectively real because Jesus Christ, God, became man, and in himself married the two, the body, the soul, the spiritual, the material. And that is the point of contention. And Jordan Peterson here goes on to say, it's terrifying. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to assent to this possibility that is plausible, that Christ could be God made man. He could have died and rose again. I don't know how, because it is terrifying. So understand this about Jordan. He's using the vocabulary of, this is why it's so hard to understand him sometimes. He's using this very heightened vocabulary of the major influences in his life. He's mentioned Carl Jung, the ideas about archetypes and the importance of meaning making to fight nihilism. And Peterson refers to Joseph Campbell, who had this concept of the monomyth, replacing Christianity, or who's placing Christianity as one among many global mythologies with the universal hero journeys, reflecting psychological patterns of becoming like gods and self-realization, actualization, all that. So Peterson, like I said before, like Jung and Nietzsche and Campbell, he's very good at diagnosing what's gone wrong with the West, that we've divorced the scientific and the logical and the rational, and we've said that's what's real, that's objective, and all this other stuff, poetry and morality, we just have to kind of bumble along in feelings and in intuition and infer and all that. But Peterson can't land anyone, including himself, anywhere solid. He sees the problem, but he can't land them. He's living off the fumes of his very considerable acts of courage back in 2016 and his capacity to sound really, really smart in a way that doesn't force his listeners to commit to or reject God or Christ. You don't have to make a choice. It sounds great. We're going to live this moral life and be masculine and all that. And he draws moral guidance from Christ. We should imitate Jesus in his self-sacrifice. We should aspire to divinization. But in the end, Peterson is not a Christian, at least not yet. He is somewhere in the Pelagian Gnostic universe that views Revelation as a psychologically and philosophically transformative story, perhaps the greatest of all the ancient stories, but still just one more on the spectrum. There is no Christian distinction. It's just the greatest in a hierarchy that's all within the universe. But the foundational question of the gospel is not asking you to evaluate, are you carrying your cross? Or did you make a self-sacrifice today? Are you part of the upward sweep of humanity? The question is, Peter, who do you say that I am? And then it is, do you love me? And then it is, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Peterson is working the problem backwards, and he has stopped asking the right questions, it seems like. But the bottom line is this: Christ is lunatic, liar, or Lord. Jordan won't face the question yet, so let's pray for him. And let's pray that Jubilee will get an actual Christian in the hot seat.